Siv presents today. You can engage with the content and he will see your responses live on his screen. So make sure that you hop onto the link in the chat right now and you will see him. And just so you make sure you're in the right place, welcome to the corporate track. I am Gnowbe and I work for Gnowbe as the marketing lead. And we're so excited to have Siv here today. He is brilliant and the global director of learning development for General Mills. He has been using Gnowbe, as you can see. He's an expert, and we're excited to hear from him on the topic of driving greater Gnowbe adoption and his findings through that. So we are excited. We're excited to get started, and I'll hand it over to you, Siv.
Thank you, Curtis. Appreciate it. As you can see from my picture, that had a lot more hair. That was before we started working on Gnowbe. Just kidding. So I'm with General Mills. I lead the learning and development for supply chain function. We brought in Gnowbe about 2 years back into our organization, and we have had some great success with it. So my intention today is to share with you what we have done, how we have worked with Gnowbe, how we helped adopt it deeper into the organization. But then once it's a small group, you can have you can stop me whenever you need to, and then we can go from there. Okay. So my first comment is around this whole experience about Gnowbe. We met Gnowbe a few years back, as I was saying. And then we did a small pilot, and then we said, yeah, this looks interesting. We had some few ideas at the point of time, but then we said, let's go ahead and sign a contract and then get them started. And we started working with them with this whole process, thinking that we will have major success right from the get-go. And then we learned a lot of lessons. That's what I'm going to cover today as we talk through it. So before I go there into more details, I want to pull this up. So think of this word digitization. This is how Gartner is defining it. Digitization is a process of changing from analog to digital form, also known as digital enablement. Now, when we look at Gnowbe, what would you consider Gnowbe as? Is it a digitization solution? Is it an enabler? Choose your response. I'm going to choose one, so they'll see everybody's preference. But here is the other definition that Gartner provides for what is called as digitalization. So Gartner defines this as a use of digital technologies to change a business model, provide a new revenue, and value-producing opportunities. That's how they define it. So once again, here is your question. Does Gnowbe enable digitalization in L&D? Digitalization is where we are converting from analog to digital. So think of classroom programs that are going into e-learning, that are going into a curated program. Digitalization is creating value-producing opportunities. How do you think Gnowbe enables it? Any response? The way we think about it is, we look at it as it drives digitalization from the point of view of it changed the way L&D does its work. So the way we thought about it was it created a very different value for our leaders and stakeholders. I'll talk a little bit more about what it was and how we did it. So imagine this is our case, right? You have a stakeholder who's coming into us and then saying they want L&D to partner with them on an organizational change that they're driving. They want us to create a 90-minute overview session and a 30-minute time for Q&A. So you're going to spend about 120 minutes per audience segment. What's the typical approach an L&D function would typically take in an organization? Pick your answer. I'll pick what we used to do. We used to pick ADDIE. Most of the time, we would go in and say, we will use ADDIE as a framework and then respond in saying, we will help our learners by doing analysis and design the content and develop it and implement it and evaluate it. That's the approach that we used to normally take. So typically, as you can see, L&D starts with ADDIE model. We took a very different approach. The approach that we took was, we called it as performance-first mindset. So we said we will move away from content creation to content curation. Gnowbe enabled us to think about curation, and I'll talk about it in a couple of minutes, in terms of what is it that we need to build. And we looked at, the typical L&D organization would look at in terms of what is the learner engagement, how many hours people spend, how many questions that they answered, how long did they finish the course, who finished the course, who did not finish the course. That's what the L&D function typically looked at. In our case, we started looking at what is the learner adoption. So with the different functionalities that Gnowbe had, we were able to go after and say, get people to actually practice, and then talk about that organizational change and react with what is their response to it. So we started focusing a lot more on learning outcome than on learning output. Like we didn't focus on how many e-learning content we created or how many PDF we created, how many job aids we created. We focused on how effectively did people understand this learning approach, this organizational change that we're going after. So with that, here is how I would like to maybe even pose with a question and then maybe pause for a response. When you think of L&D's role and when you think of Gnowbe, given that we are looking at it from a digitalization approach, where do you think is the best adoption and value creation for Gnowbe? One, is it in onboarding new people because there is a lot of value for them in chunking content, helping them learn together? Is it priming the learner before a major event, a typical neuroscience approach where you're bringing in content, which is like a preview or a trailer for people to see before the actual rollout of a major change? Or it's a reinforcement of a key concept, right, where we are looking at it and saying, people learn something, and then we are trying to see how can they use Gnowbe to reinforce and come back to the Ebbinghaus curve, the forgetting curve that we talked about. The last one is stakeholder engagement, where the stakeholder takes ownership for the learning process. Where would you see the realize the best adoption and value creation? Go ahead, pick your answer. I'll pick mine and I'll talk through it. The biggest value we found was in stakeholder engagement, and I'll talk about it right now. So while onboarding and priming the learner and reinforcement are all features that are possible through Gnowbe, our biggest value that we found was in stakeholder engagement, where we found that people where the stakeholders or the project owners or the sponsors, they found the biggest value when they realized that Gnowbe can do a few things for them. What do we do here? We shifted our focus from training to performance. We said we will focus on what the learners need to do with the change rather than getting the learners to understand or be knowledgeable about the change. So we said, let's focus on what is going to change in their behavior. And through this Gnowbe adoption, we looked at it as, do they demonstrate the behavior in a simulated scenario? we built actions for the learner. So if you see some of our Gnowbe sessions, it had a lot more actions and scenarios and simulations rather than generating content for folks. The other big win we had was we made the stakeholders own the metrics. So typically L&D would look at it as we would be the custodians who would generate the report and send it over to the stakeholders for them to look at it and take an action. What we did was we gave the power to the stakeholders to go in and look at the data on a real-time basis and then engage with the group. That's what we turned it around. So we shifted the ownership for learning to project sponsors, stakeholders, and learners, and L&D became an enabler. This is a quote from our stakeholder. She said that the way they thought about the goals for the organizational change, it changed completely with the adoption of Gnowbe. How did we do that? The first step for us with Gnowbe was getting our L&D team to be really comfortable with Gnowbe. What did we do? We had L&D teams start off as learners. We said, you have to learn Gnowbe and experience what a user is going to experience as Gnowbe, what a stakeholder is going to experience, what a curator is going to experience. So we had them curate content that they have to learn for themselves. Then we went through a learning application where they had to create a course and they had to get feedback from each other. They worked through the whole stuff, and we got them certified to the mid course. And then set expectations on what, when, and where to use Gnowbe. That's one of the first steps that we took. So I'm going to pause and ask a question here. What do you think was the biggest hurdle for L&D teams when we started with Gnowbe? You can come off mute and share your response, or type in your response here, and I'll look at the group board very quickly.
Benjamin from our chat said that he thinks it's trying to get people to come on board to download the Gnowbe app.
Absolutely. That's definitely one big challenge that was there. The other piece that we also felt was getting people to download. Yeah. I think one of the other big pieces that we had was we were able to go back and talk to people about what is the change for them. The comment you're making, Chris, is about transitioning from PPT to Gnowbe. That was a big change too, right? People were very comfortable in creating visuals and then saying, this is what you have to go after. And then we had to step back and say, no, maybe that's not what we have to go after. The biggest challenge that we found in our L&D team was that the willingness to give up control. The moment we said, we are not the experts in the space. We are not going to talk about Bloom's taxonomy, but we are actually going to create a template that enables our creators to work with the Bloom's taxonomy. We're not going to talk about adult learning principles. We're going to talk about how different learners learn by creating a template. So that became a challenge because now L&D team was moving towards creating templates that enable somebody to be successful rather than them doing the work and therefore getting kudos from those folks, right? So that's one. I think transferring of ownership, where we had to step back and say we are enablers of the learning and not the ones who are actually delivering the learning, made a huge difference. When you think of the stakeholder is on a very difficult climb. So think of a stakeholder who's driving a large-scale organizational change where we are trying to position Gnowbe as a tool to enable them. Here's a question once again. Think of how will you position Gnowbe as a new tool? We can create simple experiences for them to see the power of Gnowbe. We can make them create content from an existing template. We did that too. We can showcase data and analytics and show how it advances their agenda and make them an admin to modify actions and questions. It's multiple choice. You can pick multiple responses. This is what we did. We made the stakeholders as champions. Let me go back here and talk about it a little bit more. We made the stakeholders as champions. So we said we brought in some of the stakeholders as admins. We used the agent role in Gnowbe and then made them as admins, as agents, wherein they could see the data and then they could go in and see what is the adoption, what is the response that people give. We taught them how to go into the group board and then respond to the group board and then modify questions. The biggest value that our stakeholders found was that the content is not created once and done. They realized that they could keep adding sessions as they go forward, as they learn what people are trying to do. So I think that was the biggest value for us when we thought about what is it that the stakeholders gained from this whole experience. The stakeholders realized that this is a test and learn approach, that they could go ahead and see what landed, what communication landed, what process landed. And then when we helped them initially with designing the questions or the simulations that they should be asking of their people, then when the stakeholders were able to look at the responses, they could modify. This was not like an e-learning where you create this 3-hour content and then you have to wait for an L&D person to go and modify your program because they have access to license. Here, the power transferred completely to the stakeholder and L&D became a thought partner. So L&D shifted their role from being an owner or a custodian of the learning process, and we became a thought partner for our stakeholders. The other thing we did was they looked at how we can remove the barriers to adoption. So for example, we had questions that we had created, the multiple choices, we had videos that we had put in there. And then in all those instances, the stakeholders could see how changing a question or changing the actions changed the way the participants could respond and react. And therefore, it increased their adoption of the learning. So with the real-time access to data, it was much more easier for the stakeholders. Now, the other thing is, Gnowbe has this feature where you could see how many seconds or how many minutes a person will take to learn a particular content as you're creating it. That became a really powerful tool because the stakeholders started looking at it. They said, this is the best way. They could then tell the story. And we could give them feedback that you have way too much content and it's going to take so much more time for people to read it. That's where chunking of content made a huge difference for us. I'll quickly check if there is any comment on chat that I've not responded to. Okay. Nothing new yet. So We spoke about the shift for L&D. Then we spoke about the shift for the stakeholder. But the more important element is our user, the learner, right? So how did we engage the audience and what did we do differently? When we looked at the audience, we initially approached it as helping the stakeholders understand what are the questions they should ask, how they should ask, how they should structure the course, how they should structure the sessions. But as the stakeholders understood the data, they started creating actions. So we had this instance where you would see the adoption rate low for a particular process step because people did not answer the question right or question well enough. So then the stakeholder can go back and then add the next session in the following session. We rolled it out on a weekly basis in some instances. So they could go back and change the questions. So we started moving away from learner engagement data of number of users, number of responses, etc., to learner adoption. How many of the actions were completed? How many were right? And what is the area where people tripped up? So this data analytics gave a lot of data to our people. And for the learners, we also kept it very engaging in the sense that, I mean, since Gnowbe can be seen in any platform, people were very comfortable posting it. In fact, we ran a very simple question. We said, take a picture of wherever you are learning this content in. And one of the participants posted a picture of this person sitting in the hair salon and saying, I'm doing my work as my stylist is working on my hair. So that created levity, but also told people that you can learn anywhere, right? So that's the audience engagement part where we paid a lot of attention to. So what's next for us? Where are we and what do we want to do? So today we are using Gnowbe in helping people learn new content in meaningful chunks. We're helping people in terms of the learning architecture, where we are looking at Gnowbe as a critical enabler for a business transformation. So during a business transformation, we are thinking about how Gnowbe can be utilized at the beginning as we think about it, as the team that's working on the transformation understands what the transformation is, and then when they have to educate others, how do they bring it forward? We're also using it in a very critical business process as a coaching and a feedback tool. So we are helping our people understand what is the feedback, what do they need to learn, how do they need to work through it, and then priming learners, especially in the large scale system implementation. We take screenshots and then put it, because especially in the production environment, we take a screenshot, put it, and then ask people for feedback and input, and kind of prep them so that they can see the picture in advance. The most important value we are seeing is engaging senior leaders on key initiatives. As you know, most of the leaders want to know what is the progress on the transformation we are making. How do we know that people are getting what's the change about and what do they need to do differently? And these answers to the responses gives very clear picture to the stakeholders as to what you're trying to do. I see a chat question there. Thank you, Karis. Yeah, that's the other thing that helps quite a bit of having the culture translators that work with us in terms of helping people translate what is Gnowbe about, what is the change that you're trying to drive, and how we'll go after it. Where are we moving is that definitely we're moving towards ownership for a program, but to side with the stakeholders. So L&D is not the owner of the program, but L&D enables access. L&D enables the process. So stakeholders, they manage admissions. They would say, I have these 5 people who need to go through this process. And we say, okay, you have the power to invite them to your program. And they do it. Because now they don't need a middleman to do the work that is an administrative work that can be done quicker, faster, cheaper, better by them. But the biggest value for the stakeholders is, as I keep mentioning, it's the data. They look at the data. The fact that they're able to see the data and take corrective actions makes a big difference, because now they are no longer dependent on L&D to interpret the data for them. What we do is we provide insights. We look at the data and then say how they can modify your question, how they can think about the content differently, how they can reduce the size of the content, kind of stuff. So L&D is a facilitator and a coach to enable stakeholders to be successful. So not everything was a success. We tried a lot and we failed quite a bit. So these are some of the things that we tried where we succeeded later on, but initially we did have a lot of failures. The first one is, of course, we didn't differentiate between content creation and content curation. We were going after what's the content creation and how can we create content. And then Gnowbe was a really fascinating tool for L&D folks. So we said, where all can we use Gnowbe? And we first like a hammer in search of a nail. But then we realized we have to step back and look at different opportunities and see where it is most strategic. We have more use cases now than 12 months back, but that's because we learned the hard way and we realized that if you're not intentional about where Gnowbe is the best solution, we are going to be once again looking like a hammer in search of a nail. In terms of governance, we have realized that we used to have ownership for the platform, the program, the events, the actions, everything with L&D. We have now differentiated it. We have said ownership for the platform is within L&D. So for example, contract negotiation, what is the kind of content that goes in, management of the different programs, archiving content, kind of stuff. Onboarding agents and users, that'll be with L&D. So we would help our agents be successful. We would help them know how to navigate Gnowbe, how to use it better, kind of stuff. And then onboarding L&D teams, that will remain with us. But the program ownership and the program implementation, that stays with the stakeholder. So that's the delineation of the roles and responsibilities that we learned over the last 12 months. So it was a really sometimes painful lesson, but we are very successful now today thanks to those lessons that we learned. With respect to implementation, we were lucky. We had the first stakeholder who was very, very open for experimentation and was willing to follow through with new ideas. So that was a big success for us with respect to using the early adopter and working with them. Then the funny thing is, when this leader transitioned to a different role and was driving a different transformation, the leader said, let's get Gnowbe here. And then she was able to articulate how Gnowbe will be a success factor as we go forward. I think one of the big lessons for us was we made a lot of assumptions about Gnowbe's ability to translate. We had to now step back and then do the translation offline and then bring it back and convert it into Gnowbe. That was one of the big assumptions we made about Gnowbe initially when we started. Let me check again if there's a chat here. Thank you, Karis. Any other questions before I move forward to the next part, which is the audience engagement? Let's see. I've been speaking about this for quite a while. See, let's see if we get it. That's the difference. We have to become partners to stakeholders. That's what made the difference for us. The way we think about it is Gnowbe enhances the L&D role, that the role that the L&D function plays in an organization. We have, I think, in the instances where we have used Gnowbe, we are being seen as a thought partner for an organizational transformation than a training service provider. We no longer are seen as the people who create the e-learning content and learning solutions for people. This is in summary where we are and what we learned. We looked at it as, and then I think if I have to think of it today, if I would start afresh, I would rethink that Gnowbe is a performance improvement solution as much as it's a learning solution. So we would like to think of it as it's enabling performance, it's addressing performance gaps, especially when you're driving organizational change or whether you're driving any transformation or even onboarding people. How do we think of it as Gnowbe enables the learner to achieve a level of performance that is being set as a standard? Sharing ownership with project stakeholders, that's a huge win. So helping the project stakeholders feel that they are owners of this whole program as much as what we want it to be was a big difference. Trying many small experiments. We learned a lot through the School of Hard Knocks. We had many experiments that did not take off as we had intended, but we learned from that. So there are a couple of instances where it was a high-risk failure, but we had to take it, and it didn't work out the way we thought, and the stakeholder was not as supportive, but it was a small scale, but was still high risk, but we went forward with it. And lastly, thinking about learning as we have to shift from providing learning experience to enabling adoption. Within an organization context, when we are using Gnowbe as a solution, we are looking at it as how does it enable learning for the learner? So I think that's the way I would put it as a key value for us. I'll stop there and see if there are any other questions or comments or anything else I can help with.
Marina, thanks you. Take time if you would like to turn off your mics and speak to Siv yourself. Take use of this great opportunity. If you're not, we have a question from Ryan. You can do as Ryan did and write it in the chat. So Ryan asks, he says, thank you so much for everything you've shared so far. I agree. And his question is, could you give a couple of specific examples of projects or initiatives you used Gnowbe for recently? And furthermore, how did you assess or measure success?
Okay, that's right. Happy to answer that. So we had a significant transformation change that one of our leaders was driving. It's in the way we think about safety. This is the program that we also won a Brandon Hall Award with Gnowbe on. So typically in this situation, when the stakeholder reached us, that was the example I was giving. She was talking about doing a 90-minute session for different audience segments over a period of 2 months to help people change their thinking about how safety leadership is done in the organization. The juxtaposition was when we did the first wave, we did the same thing. We had the e-learning, we had classes, we had virtual, we had in-person training, we did all that stuff. So when they reached us, we used Gnowbe as a solution where we said, what if we don't do virtual or in-person training sessions? That's the starting point for us. We started from there. We made this person actually create courses in Gnowbe, and then we said, look, you have 30 minutes time, go create a course. You'll be surprised at what you can do. We walked up to the initial setup, and then she did it. She's a senior director, but she came back saying, I'm blown away by what this can do. So that's why we did it. We launched it for our manufacturing locations across the world, and then where we said Gnowbe became a solution for learning the safety principles, and we launched different sessions over a period of time. The way we measure our success is 2 ways. One is that directly from Gnowbe, right? We created a lot of simulations, actions for people to respond to. The correct responses is what we looked at. So with those simulations, we could then say, what is the number of correct responses we received for that particular situation? And therefore, what is the adoption of that particular change that we're going after, helping people learn? That was one way. The second is, we call it as NPS, right? The Net Promoter Score kind of stuff, where in this instance, we first covered the key stakeholders in each of the plant. And these leaders were going to then coach and train others in the plant locations. Now, we had these leaders come back and say, we want to use Gnowbe in our plant locations. So we scaled up immediately, because what happened is the initial audience was about 200 people. And then once we rolled it out, it was 5 sessions over a period of, I think, 2 or 3 months. And then the participants came back and said, this was one of the most powerful learning experience for us. Now we will take it further. We'll take it deeper. And then we increase the number of agents that we have so that at every site, they could keep track of what is the progress and enable them to make changes so they were running it forward. So for me, those are the 2 success measures. And that is what led to further programs, further implementations, and more opportunities. Well, yeah, thank you for giving me an opportunity to present here. And for those of you who wish to connect offline, I'm more than happy to. You can find me on LinkedIn. My link is up there on the Gnowbe sessions too. But I believe that Gnowbe has been a big differentiator for us. So more than happy to share our lessons learned with anyone. Thank you then. Thanks for the opportunity, guys. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for sharing your wealth of wisdom on strategic learning and how L&Ds and learners can truly transform learning design.
Well, yeah, thank you for giving me an opportunity to present here. And for those of you who wish to connect offline, I'm more than happy to. You can find me on LinkedIn. My link is up there on the Gnowbe sessions too. But I believe that Gnowbe has been a big differentiator for us. So more than happy to share our lessons learned with anyone. Thank you then. Thanks for the opportunity, guys. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for sharing your wealth of wisdom on strategic learning and how L&Ds and learners can truly transform learning design.